Sir, the economic survey has come out today. How the growth estimate of 6.5 to 7% for financial year 25 realistic and achievable?
So, first of all, what I feel, the government is using a deflator. The deflator should be the consumer price index. Instead, the government is calculating its own deflator based on the wholesale price index and the consumer price index. India has had a very abnormal situation where the wholesale price index has been very low and the consumer price index is very high. The government has conveniently used the deflator series from the wholesale price index. So if there is real growth or nominal growth at least, if there is a big nominal growth, only then this kind of real growth is possible. And if there is real growth of 8%, then corporate earnings also have to grow. I think it was the Asian Paint CEO who said seems to be GDP growth, but there is no growth in revenue or sales. It became a very complicated thing. Even today, the economic advisor claims that there is big growth. But if you look at Reliance, which is one of India's largest single company conglomerate, which is there from telecom to consumer products to retail to exporting oil, exporting diesel, petrol, LPG, and making chemicals. Their net profits have come down and revenue has barely moved. So it is very clear that there is absolutely no revenue growth and there is strain in consumption. India's economy is a consumption driven economy where people's consumption is what has driven the economy. And there have been strains at the consumption level. This will come on this will exact problem will be known if you do a national sample survey, NSSO. But the government has conveniently not disbanded the statistical. There was a difference of opinion 5 years back. And the national statistics, there is no chief statistician there has been no sample survey in India. So we do not have a granular data of what is really happening. The difference between nominal growth and real growth has been at a historic low. So, whatever the government claims as GDP is not reflecting in corporate numbers. And also, you will be clear that Mr. Anantanageswaran himself is saying that the small business has done badly in the first 20 pages which I pursued. That small industry is not doing well and there is distress in small scale industry. He claims that two-wheeler sales have finally crossed pre-pandemic level, but they might have just about. But these are wholesale numbers, where what has been sold to the dealer and not according to Vahan registration. There is a Federation of Automotive Dealer Association of India, which says more than 60,000 cars are lying at dealer sales, at dealer points without being sold. So the actual sales that has taken place from the, if you measure by Vahan data, after nearly 3-4 years of the pandemic, passenger way two wheelers have not convincingly crossed the pre pandemic level, and even though 5 years have gone by. So it is very clear that the economy has not recovered from the triple shock of demonetization, and then you had a faulty implementation of GST, and then now you have had a COVID pandemic. And India remained only one country which did not give direct stimulus to any of the people who are affected by pandemic except giving some free ration. So the small scale sector has been badly affected. Business Line in a recent report says our garment exports are at 20% lower than 2015 levels and stay sit in place where I sit, that is Madras. Their textile forms a very big portion of the state Tamil Nadu, and the sales of garments is at 20% level below the 2015 level, while imports from Bangladesh have surged. To obfuscate the issue, the government is now combining services exports and total merchandise exports. If I remember correctly, the current Union Finance Minister, who was then the Commerce Minister, claimed at the first end of her first term of this government that total exports would cost $900 billion. All I can say is now on the 11th year of this government, we are nowhere near $500 billion. They promised $900 billion in export. We are nowhere near $500 billion of merchandise exports. The government conveniently adds our services exports, which is basically our software exports, to the figure of merchandise exports and claim that we are at 700 billion export. It is known that India has been a big software powerhouse and exporting services for the last several decades. But the real problem was in manufacturing and manufacturing exports, which was mainly done by the small and medium sector, has been troubled. And these three conditions I mentioned to you in terms of demo, the GST, and the pandemic has made sure that they have never recovered. And therefore, our merchandise exports has done very badly. The current government claimed for several years that they have launched new projects like Made in India, and now they have production linked incentive schemes. In spite of all this, manufacturing as a percentage of GDP is at 13%, which means we are now as low as 1960 when Pandit Nehru was the Prime Minister. So, what the government has successfully done is taken by taking back merchant manufacturing as a percentage of GDP to almost independence levels. Without manufacturing, you cannot have quality jobs. And the government is looking at PF data where already existing jobs have become formal jobs. And these are not new job creations. The recent elections have shown that there is a big problem in employment. In the home state of the Prime Minister, for a private sector job where 20 vacancies were there, there was a recent photograph where thousands of people tried to get into a hotel at the same time and the railing broke down. In Bombay, for nearly 100 jobs in a private sector, 20,000 people applied. There are also reports of PhD people applying for class 4 and class 5 jobs in government in North India. All this indicates that there is a huge problem in employment. Unless we solve the issue with manufacturing, which we have not, you will not be able to solve this problem.
So, despite these global uncertainties, how do you think the domestic consumption can support growth?
Without domestic consumption, there can be no growth. How can the government support domestic consumption? If you look at direct taxes as a component, personal taxes plus taxes on capital markets, that is STT, are far higher than corporate taxes. In which country will the individual pay more tax than the corporations? It is the corporations which make large profits who have to pay more taxes. You have now facilitated a K shaped recovery where the rich are becoming richer and the poor and the middle class are being made poorer.
So, the survey claims like short-term inflation outlook like softening. What is your view on that, sir?
I don't know what is because the RBI now claims has been claiming that they will always have brought down inflation. But every time they come near 4%, suddenly it pops up back to 5.5. And like I have mentioned, when they calculate GDP, they come up with figures less than 1%. So it cannot be both cannot be true. That you cannot have prices of 4.5 5%, price rises of above 5% on one side, and when you calculate GDP, you claim that you have only less than 1% as your deflator. So something somewhere is not matching. And also, what I want to point out is inflation really hurts the poor. For someone like me, consumption is a very small portion of my income, and even consumption of food is a minuscule portion of my total consumption. But for the poor and the middle class, food and shelter represents more than 50% of their consumption basket. So rising food prices is also affecting domestic consumption. So if you can control food prices, then automatically consumption will improve. Also, if you have more practical taxation policy where there is a balance between personal taxes and corporate taxes, then you will have more equal society. The claim of the finance minister was that when corporates have given lesser taxes, they will invest. But capex, private investments in has come down dramatically. In fact, the survey points out that if you look at plant and machinery, if that number is even smaller, the economic advisor understands unless there is demand, corporates are not going to invest just by cutting taxes. All that has happened is because the finance minister has cut taxes, you have left too much money in the hands of the rich, which has led to a speculation orgy in the capital markets. I am not saying this. The RBI governor and the SEBI chief are now claiming that there are no deposits in banks because people have moved money into speculation, and that a relook at fund futures and options trading is mandatory because people are not putting money in banks. Now, who is responsible for the state of affairs? That people believe that they are not getting enough returns in banks and should be dealing in speculative activity in the stock exchange to get returns. உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் தெரியும், ரீசெண்டாக மீடியாவில் பார்த்துருப்பீங்க. ஏன்னா தமிழ்நாடு காங்கிரஸ் கமிட்டி ஊடக பிரிவு தலைவராக அப்பாயிண்ட் பண்ணியிருக்காங்க. ஸோ பொலிட்டிக்கலாக என்னோட வியூஸ் என்ன அப்படின்னு நீங்கள் ட்விட்டரில் ஃபாலோ பண்ணணும்னு நினச்சிங்க, @AnandS1967 என்னை ஃபாலோ பண்ணுங்க. என்னோட ரியல் ஒரிஜினல் ஐடி, ட்விட்டர் ஐடி ஃபார் பாலிட்டிக்ஸ் அதுதான். ஸோ பாலிட்டிக்ஸ் சம்மந்தப்பட்ட என்னோட எல்லா ஒப்பீனியன்ஸ், வியூஸ் எல்லாமே அதில் வரும். அதில் ஃபாலோ பண்ணுங்கள். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.